On a wet evening, while driving home, Officer Smith was stopped by a patrol cop. Officer Smith discovered a secret file in his car containing a termination notice and a list of his misconducts after demanding to examine his paperwork and conducting an illegal search. The confrontation abruptly changed when the Officer Smith faced the repercussions of his actions when he realized he was pestering his newly appointed superior. He remained calm and informed Director Hayes, who ordered an instant termination. Smith stood helpless in the rain. Despite the protagonist's apparent control over the event, a police officer believed he was when an officer pulled over a black man on a desolate street and illegally searched his trunk. His confident face turned ashen, and his hands trembled as he read the words on the top page of the suitcase. "This story will leave you stunned." Have you have those moments when something feels off? As I drove down the main road, the rain poured gently, and I felt that it was like the calm before a storm wipers had trouble keeping up, but something felt off. After a long day, I was heading home, my head feeling mushy and wanting a hot shower and some peace, when I noticed red and blue lights flashing in the rearview mirror. A police car was approaching, so I muttered, "Here we go." I wasn't speeding, the taillights were fine, and the registration was valid. So, what's the problem? Oh, I know, black driver classic. I stopped hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, because who doesn't understand the police car's rules when I came to a stop? I noticed a tall officer wearing a spotlessly clean uniform take off his boots. His entire manner, slicing through the damp pavement, exuded haughtiness as if he owned the town. To be honest, I was simply too exhausted to deal with the license and registration. When he got to my window, he barked. He didn't say hello or good evening, but he went right to the point. His tone wasn't one of inquiry, but rather one of command, as if I'd already done something wrong. "Good evening, officer," I said, maintaining my composure. "May I ask why you stopped me?" "You were driving too slow." He glared at me as if I had insulted his mother. I blinked. "Driving too slow, is that even a thing? It's raining." I replied, "I'm just being careful." More closely, water is trickling off his hat. "Is there anything concealed in this car?" "You're not an officer, sir," I said calmly. "Just you dripping with enough disdain to fill a stadium, officer. I have nothing to hide." I opened the glove compartment to retrieve my license and registration, emphasizing the word slowly, because I didn't want him to think I was reaching for a weapon. He grabbed the papers out of my hands and hardly looked at them before ordering me to stay here. I turned and headed back to his patrol car after watching him in the rearview mirror, almost certain he was going to call for backup or pull a stunt. Something about him gave me the impression that things wouldn't work out. When he came back, his face was filled with annoyance, as though he was searching for a reason to escalate the situation but couldn't find one. I said, "Why did I ask?" In a polite but firm tone, "I haven't done anything wrong." He repeated every word, emphasizing it as if I were deaf. I sighed and complied honestly, realizing that there was no point in arguing. I went outside into the rain, where the cold and wetness was seeping through my jacket. He ordered me to open the trunk, pointing to the back of the car. "With all due respect, officer, a search warrant is required." His features twisted into a sarcastic smile when I stated that. "You're wrong." That made my gut tighten. "I have the right to search anything I want, officer, and you don't," I gently said, but he wasn't listening and was already making his way to the trunk, searching through the keys as like he owned the vehicle. He totally ignored me when I called louder, opening the trunk as like it were his personal treasure chest. Then he noticed a sleek gray file box tucked away in the corner. "What is this?" he inquired, his voice now tinted with suspicion and interest about my personal stuff. I gave a direct response. He had already grasped for my heart. even if you don't have the right started to race as he opened the file box. Let me tell you something about officers like Smith. They don't know when to stop. He acted as though he had solved the biggest case of his career when all he had was my trunk and that dumb gray file box. Now, as I watched him remove it, I felt a strange mixture of excitement and disappointment. Yes, I'll admit that I was curious to see how this would play out, because he had no idea the storm he had just entered to put that down. I said, attempting to keep my composure even though I was shouting that it was private property and you're going too far. He ignored my surprise and clicked the box open, and when he opened it to look inside, his eyes froze on the first page. His face was so pale that I thought he had just seen a ghost. He squinted at the document and blinked several times, as if hoping it would change into something else. "Wait, what the hell is this?" he muttered, but I could hear it clearly. His voice had lost all of its previous tone. Now, filled with fear, Officer Smith replied casually, "What's wrong?" The tables had rapidly turned. Leaning back against my car, he brought the paper closer to his face while his hands trembled. I could see the bold, large print from where I stood's termination notice at the top of the page, which included his name and a list of offenses that would make anyone question hiring him for even a babysitting job. This couldn't be real. He stammered, his voice barely a whisper, and then he looked up at me, and I swear I had never seen a man go from arrogant to terrified so quickly in my life. "What on earth is this?" He started, then stopped, staring at me with a face as white as the clouds over us. I raised an eyebrow in response. "This can't be real. No, it's real. I apologize for disappointing you, but I am your new superior." His mouth opened and closed multiple times, but no words were said. It was like seeing a fish flop on dry land, and I had a sense of joy since I knew that this had to be an error. He eventually sputtered, his words hanging in his throat. "You can't," I said, holding up my hand, "because you're not supposed to let me stop you right there. You say something even more stupid than what you've previously said, and I've been brought here to clean up this department, and guess what? Your name is at the top of my list." He appeared to have been struck by a train, but we can figure this out. His arms were lowered to his sides, and he still had the paper clasped tightly in his fingers. His voice trailed off, almost begging, "Oh, you didn't mean it." As he continued, "I didn't mean it. There was a major misunderstanding when you pulled me over without cause, searched my car without a warrant, and went through my personal belongings because I had interrupted you with sarcasm." He continued, his voice becoming increasingly frantic. "I had no idea who you were, is that right?" Intended to make it acceptable, I yelled and stared him down. "Does your behavior change if I'm not your boss?" "Justified because, let me tell you something, Smith, the law no longer operates that way." His face was filled with panic and disbelief, and his jaw twitched as his mouth opened to speak, but nothing came out. I could see him searching his brain frantically for a solution, but the truth was that there was none. At last, he whispered, his voice barely audible, "Give me an opportunity to clarify." "Oh, don't worry. You'll have your time to explain, but not to me," I said, shaking my head. For the first time tonight, I felt completely in control. I took out my phone and dialed the number that would officially end his career. The rain continued to fall, with icy droplets running down my coat, but we stood there calmly in the rain, leaning against my car. He appeared to have just been hit by a bus, and the paper in his hand seemed to burn him. He quickly shoved it back into the file box, opening his mouth likely to make an excuse or plea. I wasn't going to give him that gratification, though. "Go ahead," I said, leaning against the car and crossing my arm. "Say whatever. You believe it will keep your employment." He glanced at me and started speaking in a wobbly voice, weak as a leaf in the wind. This is simply a misunderstanding, okay? I could use a good chuckle. I simply wanted to suggest that perhaps we don't need to make everything so dramatic. I can solve this, and I'll apologize for repeating a bitter chuckle that escaped me. His mouth was hanging open before snapping shut like a dead fish. Tell me, Smith, how many individuals you've done this stunt on? How many other people didn't have a file in their trunk that would have caused you to retreat? He fell silent. As I believed I had stated, his eyes were shifting to the ground as though it had the answers, but we both knew that this wasn't the first time, and that it wouldn't have been his last if it weren't for me. He begged once again. Shake my head. You're not sorry for what you did. You're just sorry you got caught. His voice is so frantic that you must realize how important this work is to me. I was wrong, all right, but I can grow and change. Please don't do this. I looked at him for a while, allowing his words to linger in my mind. Rain continued to fall, soaking us both, but I ignored it and maintained a steady gaze. Allowing the quiet to speak louder than anything I could say, this wasn't about him. Rather, it was about the individuals who came before me, the ones who never had the opportunity to advocate for themselves or the authority to express that they wanted to change. His face twisted in agony, his expression crumpling like a shredded paper bag, and for a moment I thought he might start crying. "You can't do this," he whispered, his voice so weak it was barely audible. I finally said, "Prove it, but you won't do that in my department." I firmly said, "I need this job, but you really need a wake-up call. Take this as your wake-up call." I took out my phone, contacted the number I'd prepared for this moment, and after the line rung once, a familiar voice, Director Hayes, spoke. It was me, and I said, "I have Officer Smith here, and the decision is effective immediately. He's being fired." As the reality hit him like a freight train, his eyes widened. He stammered, his voice increasing in panic. "Please, I'll do anything you want," he said, raising my hand to halt him. "Notify HR and make sure the paperwork gets processed quickly." "Smith, it's over. Don't consider appealing. Instead, gather your belongings and turn in your pistol and badge at the end of the day, if the grievances against you are thoroughly recorded." I hung up the phone without waiting for his answer, and when I turned to face him again, he was still standing there with his eyes wide and his face twisted in horror and disbelief. That's the look you get when your greatest nightmare comes true. "Here's some advice," I replied, getting closer to him. "The next time you put on that uniform, remember what it stands for. Protect and serve, not harass and threaten." He didn't say anything, but stood there, soaking and defeated. If anyone is stupid enough to let you wear it again, remember that. As I closed my trunk and picked up the file box, how would you respond if you were in this circumstance? If this story resonated with you, please share it with your friends and loved ones to spread the message of justice, respect, and accountability. Together, we can create a just society where everyone is treated fairly and their rights are respected. Every small action can make a big difference in the world. Thank you so much for your continued support of the channel. Have you ever had to stand up for your rights in the face of injustice? Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments section. Your story might inspire and help others going through similar situations. Throughout the content creation process, we really thank each and every one of you. We kindly ask that you overlook any little errors that may have occurred. We wish everyone happiness, serenity, and good health in life. Stay tuned for more.